And now we are live on Facebook. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the first session of 2021. A very happy new year to everybody who is joining us live on Facebook and later on YouTube. Today, we are joined by a great scholar, somebody who is an inspiration to a whole generation of history students and social thinkers, Professor Rajan Gurukar. Hello, sir, and welcome to the session.
Oh, good afternoon. New Year greetings to you as well.
He's a leading social scientist, historian, professor, and a writer. He has written many books and articles on different topics. He did his PhD in 1985 in historical socioeconomics from Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi, and he has worked on different and several important posts such as the dean of faculty, member of the academic senate and syndicate of a few universities, and social science research institutes and others. After completing his doctoral education, he joined as the teaching faculty at the Center for Historical Studies of JNU for some time before taking up the chair of professor and director School of Social Sciences, Mahatma Gandhi University, Kottayam, Kerala in 1988. He is also the former Vice Chancellor of Mahatma Gandhi University, Kottayam. Currently, he is the Sundarajan Visiting Professor at the Center for Contemporary Studies, Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore. He currently serves as the Vice Chairman of the Kerala State Higher Education Council, and he has written six books in Malayalam and English on the topic of social, economic, cultural history of Kerala and structural anthropology, historical sociology, and human ecology on of the southern Western Ghats. He has also written many articles in various magazines, newspapers on current economic, political, and social issues. Without further ado, I would request our distinguished speaker, Professor Gurukar, to begin with his lecture. And after the lecture, we can have a conversation where we will be taking audience questions. So those of you who wish to ask questions to Professor Gurukar can write them down on Facebook live chat and we'll be taking those, or you can mail us at karwanheritage@gmail.com. Over to you, sir.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. As you all know, topic is Tamil heroic poetry and social formation. Now, let us discuss a little bit about what is this thing called Tamil heroic poetry. Uh, Tamil heroic poetry is popularly called Sangam poetry, and there are altogether 2,381 poems composed by 473 poets. Half of the total poems were composed by some 16 poets. And out of the poems, some 102 poems are anonymous. And interestingly, 238 poems were composed by a single poet called Kapilar. The smallest poem is in 3 lines, and the longest one is in 782 lines. Now, we should examine the process of getting the whole poems named as Sangam poems, and then how did the name gradually phase out, and the expression Tamil heroic poems came in. The legend around the idea of Sangam has to be briefly mentioned. The legend says that the Pandya kings had 3 assemblies of kings successively. The first assembly, uh, called Kudal or Sangam, consisted of 549 poets, which included several gods like Shiva, Muruga, and so on. And that assembly lasted 4,440 years. And then the flood came, the entire poems got destroyed. And then the second Kudal or Sangam or assembly of poets or academy of poets was constituted. And that lasted for about 3,700 years. And there were 1,700 poets at that time, which also included some gods and heavenly personages. Uh, and it was during this period, the most important Tamil text called Tolkappiyam. It's a linguistic grammatical poetics text, which also gives you some idea about the philosophy of the Tamil culture. That academy also got destroyed, and the contributions also were taken away by flood. And then came the third assembly. That lasted 1,850 years. And there were so many poets, but as I said earlier, we know only 473 of them. And that actually covers the corpus of Sangam literature. And the legend is mentioned in the commentary of an early medieval grammatic text called Iraiyanar Agapurul. Its commentary is called Nachinar Kinniyam. It's in Iraiyanar Agapurul's commentary, which was written around 15th century. The legend comes up. And the legend is just a legend, as you can see. In the case of number of poets and the case of number of years the academy lasted, and so all these are hyperbole and completely mythological. Now, let us leave the legend there and come to the question of Tamil heroic poetry. Why is that the poems called heroic poetry? It was K. Kailasapati, a Sri Lankan scholar, who wrote the famous book called Tamil Heroic Poetry, published at London in 1968. Ever since the publication of Tamil Heroic Poetry, scholars became skeptical about using the expression Sangam, because Kailasapati pointed out a very important thing, that these poems were compositions by bards. And in that sense, these poems were part of oral literature, and minstrels and bards used to be going around singing and then receiving gifts from the chieftains. Now, the poems are all in praise of heroic rulers. Heroic rulers of three lineages well known in South India: the Chera, Pandya, and Chola. These were the three important ruling lineages, and they are referred to as the Movendar. And there were lesser chieftains as well. The lesser chieftains below the Muvenda, the Chera, Pandya and Chola, were called the Velir. Velir chieftains were hill chieftains, and below them were the village chieftains or Ur Kirar. We have some kind of a hierarchy, but there was no running thread of political control across the three levels of chieftains. The Ur Kirar or village headman, the hill chieftain called Velir, and the Muvender, Chera, Pandya, and Chola. These chieftains were praised by bards who visited them, and then the chieftains gave the bards gifts. Among bards, there were some scholarly bards or some scholars who imitated the bards and composed songs. And there were among them Brahmins and the Jains, and sometimes the Buddhists and the Ajivikas, we do not know, but evidently some Jains were there. Now, these were songs in praise of heroes, and therefore Kailasapati rightly thought that the poems should be called heroic poems, and heroic poems showing its past as oral tradition. Oral tradition would presuppose no identity of the poets behind the compositions. But here you find a difference. The composers are known, and it shows perhaps a transitional phase. The poems were sung by the composers themselves, and they belong to the main bard community called Panas. And the poets included women as well. There were some 27 women among the 473 poets. Now, how come that these poems happen to be available to us? And these poems were long forgotten, and it was during the colonial period these were discovered by three scholars. Arumuga Navalar, who lived between 1822 1879, and C.W. Damodaran Pillai, who lived during 1832 and 1901, and U.V. Swaminatha Iyer, who lived between 1855 and 1942. Now, these three scholars worked on the corpus that U.V. Swaminatha Iyer first discovered at a Shaiva Matha, about 20 kilometers northeast of Kumbakonam. That was under the control of a Tamil scholar, Deshikar, with the permission of Deshikar, U.V. Swaminatha Iyer, and also the other two scholars, worked with the palm leaf manuscript, and then they found the manuscript consisted of anthologies consisting of poems. These poems were classified, redacted, and edited already by some scholars. And Kailasapati says that this work of collection, classification, redaction, edition, etc., was done by probably some Jain scholars. And that happened maybe during 6th, 7th centuries or slightly earlier. And the poems actually belonged to circa 3rd century BCE and circa 3rd century Common Era, which means the collection and classification of the poem took place something like 300 years after. So Kailasapati pointed out the time lag of some 3 centuries between the composition and then the classification. And poets or the singers composed the poems from their place during their times, which could be 3rd century BCE, and then successively at different points of time. So evidently poets belong to different periods and they composed poems for praising the chieftains of their time or chieftains who were their patrons. Now the poems are found classified and organized mainly into 2 groups. One group is called Ettutogai, the 8 anthologies. See, you can see anthology consisting of anthologies. So Ettutogai is a collection of 8 collection of poems, 8 collections of poems. And the other group called Pattu Patu, 10 idols. Let's see which are these 8 anthologies. One is Kuruntogai, which is meant to be 400 small poems composed by 205 poets. Or let us say 400 poems sung by 205 singers. Then Natrinai, 400 poems composed by 175 poets. Ainkuru Nur, 500 poems composed by 5 poets. Akananur is 400 poems composed by 145 poets. Then Purananur, consisting of 400 poems composed by 557 poets. Paripadal, consisting of 70 poems sung by 13 poets, and Kalitoge, consisting of 150 poems composed by 5 poets. Then Patittu Pattu, 100 poems divided into 10 units of 10 poems. Each 10 poems singing in praise of a Chera king. In the order of their genealogy, we find the poems organized, but the first 10 and the last 10 are missing. So we have actually only 80 poems, but there are some 6 additions. That kind of variation you can see in the case of other poems as well. For example, in Kuruntogai, instead of 400 poems, we have 402 poems. Similarly, in Ainkuru Nur, there should be 500 poems, but we have collected only 499. In Akananuru, there should be 400 poems, but we have one extra. In Purananuru, we are supposed to be having 400 poems there, but 398 are available. Similarly, in Paripadal, there should be 70 poems, but 33 poems are available. So such variations we find. Coming back to Patittu Pattu, the first 10 poems were dedicated to the first Chera ruler, Udiyan Cherladan. And the second 10 poems are assigned to the second ruler, Imayavaramban Nedum Cherladan, and the poems were composed by Pale Gautamanar. The third tens, the third tens are assigned to Imayavaramban and composed by Pale Gautamanar. And the fourth 10 was composed by Kapiyat Kappiyanar, and he sang in praise of the Chera chieftain called Kalangai Kanni Narmudi Cheral. And the fifth 10 was composed by Paranar, and the 10 poems praised Selkedu Kutuven, a Chera ruler. The sixth 10 was composed by Kakai Padiniyar Nachallayar, and she sang in praise of Adkot Pat Cherladan. Then seventh 10 poems were composed by Kapilar, and the hero over there is Selkedu, not Selkedu Kutuvan, but Selva Kadungo Variyadan. Selva Kadungo Variyadan was the ruler. Then eighth unit of 10 poems was composed by Arishil Kidar, and he sang in praise of Perincheral Irumpore. And then the ninth 10 was composed by Perunkundur Kidar, and the hero over there was Ilancheral Irumpore. You have Ettutoge of these poems, Ettutoge consisting of 8 different anthologies. I'll just repeat the names of the 8 anthologies once again. Kuruntoge, Natrine, Aingurunuru, Akananuru, Purananuru, Kalitoge, Paripadal, and Padittu. Now let us come to the next group called Pattupat. Pattupat, the 10 idols. Each one is a long poem, a single poet writing. We do not know whether they wrote it or they just sang it. Anyway, long poems. One is Tirumurugattupade. That consisted of 317 lines. Purunarattupade, that consisted of 248 lines. Chirupanattuppade consisted of 269 lines. Then Perumpanattuppade in 500 lines. Mullai Pattu in 103 lines. Madurai Kanji in 782 lines. That is the biggest. And Nedunal Vadai in 188 lines. Kurinnipattu in 361 lines. Pattinappalai in 301 lines. Malay Padugadam in 583 lines. These are the 10 idols. Now, in addition to this, we have Tolkappiyam, which is supposed to be belonging to the second Kudal, second Sangam, according to the legend. But this is the linguistic text, the poetic text, which gives the details of the composition, the characteristics of these compositions, and the grammatical details and so on. So evidently, Tolkappiyam must have been written only after these poems were available in classified form. You cannot expect a grammatical text before the coming into being of language. This is mainly poetics. You cannot expect a poetics, Kavya Mimamsa, poetics written before poems were composed. It's reasonable to believe that Tolkappiyam belonged to the post-Ettutogai works and also post-Pattupattu. It's interesting to see that Tolkappiyam, composed by Tolkappiyar. 12 means old, and Kappiyam is Kavyam. It's just the Tamil rendering of the Sanskrit word Kavya. Old poem. It's written in words and it contains the darshana, the worldview of the Tamil culture, and then it gives you details of the science of the Tamil poems. Now, Tamil poems, according to scholars, belong to the time range of circa 3rd century BCE and circa 3rd century CE. But there are differences of opinion among scholars. Some people consider 2nd century BC as the beginning phase, although they agree with the 3rd century AD as the end point. But anyway, conventional scholars, they go by the legends partly, and they consider this as part of the great Tamil civilization. And they believed that the Pandya rulers had assembly or academy of poets, and these poets were rewarded by the kings and so on. But modern studies show that, as I told you earlier, these were oral compositions later written down, and that was a period when heroes were praised and the poems did that social function of praising the chieftains or the rulers. Now, according to Tolkappiyam, the poems consist of a division between Akam and Puram, the internal and the external. It relates to the themes of the poems, matters relating to love, affection, various emotional aspects, and so on, were considered to be internal, and they belonged to the Akam group, Akam Nanuru, for example. Then Puram, the external matters, administration, battle, and various such external activities. When themes were around such external matters, such poems belonged to the Puram group. In addition to the Akam Puram division, there was the concept of Thinai. Thinai in the literary context would mean the landscape. And Tolkappiyam gives you a division of the Thinai into 7. The first two Thinais you have the concept of love around this. The first division is called Kaikilai, which is what is called unilateral love or one-sided love. Then Perunthinai is unequal love. Then the third is the Ainthinai, the 5 Thinais. 5 Thinais referring to the 5 landscapes. And 5 Thinais stand for ideal love. In the literary context, it referred to the context and character of love. Apart from the 7 Thinais, Kaikilai, Perunthinai, and Ainthinai. Ainthinai, 5 separate landscapes or Thinais with the symbolic meaning of the stages of love. As I said earlier, one is the one-sided love, the other is unequal, and then the ideal love. The 5 Thinais are Kurinyi or the hilly backwoods, Mulle or the pastoral tracts, and Pale, the parched zone or the dry land, Marudam, the fertile agrarian tracts, Neithal, the coastal tracts. In addition to the Thinais, we find the concept of Thurai, again relating to the poetic themes and context. There are various Thurais, each Thurai consisting of one kind of theme or the other. For example, if the poems relate to the status of the chieftain, they belonged to Thurais. Like such poems were classified under Arajavaka Thurai or Thane Nilai Thurai, Nallijai Vanji Thurai, and so on. These Thurai would indicate the content and context of the poems. So there are various Thurais of this kind. If the chieftain's lineage is praised, then such poems are classified under Eran Mullai Thurai, Vallan Mullai Thurai, Kudinilai Uraithal Thurai, Nedumari Thurai, Mudalvanji Thurai, and so on. There is a recurring theme in certain poems, that is, a bard is praising the chieftain by saying that you have a very beautiful daughter and the big chieftains have come to take her away, and they are competitively positioned around your small village, and your rich village is going to be destroyed, and your village is so small that the village would be completely destroyed in the process of the big chieftains fighting against one another for winning the hands of your daughter, and so on. So it's a saying that your daughter is so beautiful that the chieftains, even the Vandar level chieftains, the Chera, Pandya, Chola, they were not able to resist their temptation, and they are all near your village. That is a method of praising the chieftain. Uh, Such poems are classified under a Turai called Magadpar Kanji Turai. Magal is doctor, Magadpar Kanji Turai poems. And certain poems give pieces of advice to the chieftains. And such poems are under Chevi Arivuru Turai poems. They are poems whispered in the ears of the chieftain. They talk about the ideal behavior of a chieftain. What should a chieftain do? During the heroic period, chieftains were all heroes and they showed their heroism in plunder and collection of booty. The practice of the period was uh, taking the soldiers across settlements and then plundering them and returning with booty and redistributing the booty. So that was the practice. That being the principal practice of the time, poems legitimized the act and spread the passion and value of heroism and celebrated the might and main of the chieftains. Uh, a, a poet is expected to do that. A poet is expected to celebrate the might of the chieftain. But the poems belonging to Chevi Arivuru Ture advise the chieftain to behave differently. These poems would say that you should not behave like an elephant in the sugarcane field, where the elephant destroys much more than what it would eat. That's what you are doing. You are destroying the settlements and taking what they have saved. Instead of doing this, you should behave like a butterfly. You should behave like a bee, which goes to the flowers and takes honey without destroying the flower. A butterfly does the same thing. This cannot be openly told because the contemporary dominant ideology, passion, and value related to heroism. Heroic celebration was important. And therefore, poets who had some familiarity with taxation, the practice of periodic exaction of the surplus. And these poets are supposed to be migrants from the northern part. And most of them were either Jains or the Brahmins. And they were familiar with some of the ruling lineages which had the practice of periodic exaction of surplus. But here in Tamilagam, the Tamil macro region, during the period, heroism prevailed. And their practice was the politics of plunder. There are various other Turays doing the same function. Purunmozhi Kanji Ture, talking about the ideal principles, what a chieftain should do and so on, advising them to protect the peasants, protect the agriculturists by providing them water, irrigation, and sustain them for the welfare of the kingdom and so on. So there are various such poems. In addition to the Turai division, there is a further what is called a philosophical kind of characterization of the heroic poems. they talk about the mudal, that is the basic resource of each Thinai or landscape. Mudal is what the given landscape has by way of the naturally given. That is its capital. Then Karu, which is the potential of the landscape, that which is there in the form of an embryo. It can grow. It is symbolic of the fertility, symbolic of productivity. Then there is Uri, which relates to the emotional aspects. So Mudal, the actual resources, and Karu, the embryonic form or the life in its embedded form, and Uri, the emotional aspects. Further, there is the description of people who inhabited these Thinais or landscapes. So here we should realize that the idea of Thinai was not mere symbolic or poetic kind of thing. There was a lot of reality about it. Each Thinai was inhabited by people, and people adapted to the landscape ecosystem, and then they had their subsistence and survival practices. So poetics gives us a very realistic picture of what's going on in each landscape. For example, the hilly backwoods called the Kurinyi Thinai, Kuravar, and then the hunters existed in that landscape. They were hunters and gatherers, and also they practiced a little bit of slash and burn agriculture. Then Mulle, primarily a pastoral tract, the Idayar or the pastoral community lived there, and they were also practicing agriculture, mainly millet. Then the next Thinai called Marutam, where we have wetland and uh, land with enough water, so the land could be cultivated. That landscape could sustain even rice agriculture. But the landscape is not referring to the actual wetlands. This is red soil tracts, red soil undulating terrain where rice cultivation was also possible. Then Neidal, which is the coastal land, where uh, people took to the fishing and salt manufacturing as their livelihood activities. Interestingly, you find human adaptation to the natural ecosystem, and then through adaptation, they evolved their subsistence strategies and survival strategies. Now, when Tamil scholars uh, encountered these concepts, they dismissed them, saying that these must be some kind of reference to the old time experiences and the evolutionary process and so on. So scholars like S.K. Iyengar, P.T. Srinivas Iyengar, K.V. Subramania Iyer, and so on, believed that this must have been some idea of the past, because they all presumed the so-called Sangam period as the period or the heyday of the Tamil civilization. Therefore, people living in various ecosystems as hunters gatherers, as primitive agriculture is with Sudan cultivation and so on, and some people in the Palaythine, the parched zone or the dry land, living as plunderers. All these were unbelievable for them, so they considered these as the past story. Anyway, they just dismissed it like that. But for the first time, Shivaraja Pillai, who wrote about the chronology of the Tamil poems, now, he had a much more realistic kind of understanding. He dismissed the legends and prepared a reliable chronology of the poems. It was at a later stage, the concept of Thinai was deconstructed. K. Shivathampi in 1974 published an article on the aspects of economy of the early Tamil poems. There, he was very realistic about the Thinai concept and formulated the idea of people living in various ecosystems with the sustainable subsistence strategies. But he was a Marxist believing in the Asiatic mode of production. So he thought that certainly the period of the poems was of a civilization, but that was a period of the typical Asiatic mode of production, where agricultural societies got rather stunted, and they were under the absolutist rulers. And therefore, there was a kind of retardation. But soon that got reinterpreted. For example, in my book, Social Formations of Early South India, I reinterpreted the whole thing as the actual situation of the time. I used the social formation perspective there. Now we should define at this stage what is social formation. You are all familiar with the Marx concept of mode of production. Marx presented actually each mode of production as a social and economic entity with its economic base, with its political superstructure and ideological superstructure. Although in mode of production theory, Marx was focusing on the dominant mode which characterized the mode of production, in his Wissenschaft Formen, social formation, Marx had in mind a situation of several unevenly evolved economies, unevenly evolved forms of production, unevenly evolved means of subsistence, coexisting and interacting against one another. But there existed one dominant form of production. Now we have a clear definition of this in a later scholar, Poulantzas. Poulantzas defined social formation as a combination of several unevenly evolved forms of production, structured by the dominance of one form of production which was superior, not always in terms of technology and productivity. That definition I found quite suitable in the context of the social formation of Tamil heroic poems. That is, you find the thinais of different type, but the parched zone or the dry land that augmented during the summer or when there was shortage of rain, and in certain parts millets could be cultivated, but the other area remained as inhospitable, and that land was very extensive, and therefore it was called one pulam during the period. And the various other productive thinais, particularly Marudam and Mullai, they combined to make what is called the agrarian zone, and that is referred to as Manpulam. The Manpulam, One Pulam division is interesting. And if you go by each Thinai, its economy was of a very low kind. It was not an economy capable of producing surplus. Then the overall nature of the economy was of a poor kind, always having scarcity and so on. At the same time, you find certain interesting features of the period from other sources. Let us first take One Pulam and its economy as the dominant one. One Pulam, as I told you, had the principal activity of plunder, and that used to be the major area of the chieftains. They plundered and then they redistributed the booty. And the activities of the area called One Pulam were on the one side millet cultivation, and on the other the animal husbandry in the form of sheep farming and also as cattle keeping. Cattle keeping and sheep farming were the most important activities of One Pulam. And chieftains had the practice of cattle lifting. See, these chieftains are praised. So you find a combination of millet cultivation and pastoral practices here. So it's justified to call the economy as agro-pastoral. And as chieftains, they had dominance over other thinais. They were plundering chieftains. But if you go by the technology and productivity of One Pulam, they were inferior. Productivity was good in Manpulam, particularly in the Marudam tract. So here, Pulansa's definition of social formation suits very well. You have various means of subsistence or forms of economies like hunting gathering, then pastoral agriculture, shifting agriculture, and irrigated agriculture, and fishing, salt manufacturing, and various thinais shared their produce. Hunters and gatherers came with their forest resources, and pastoralists exchanged their dairy products. And in all the Thinais, salt was required, salt and dried fish. So in bullock carts, these were carried to the other Thinais. So there existed inter-Thinai exchange. And they had a kind of reciprocity, what is called goods for goods exchange. That's how they interacted against one another. You have this picture clear in the Tamil heroic poems. So, in the light of the Tamil heroic poems, you can easily say that during the period, agro-pastoral social formation existed with the Sweden cultivation, and pastoralism had a dominance over other forms of subsistence. Now, what about other source material of the period? Now, archaeologically, we have remains going slightly anterior to this period, but continuing during the period that we are talking about, the period between 3rd century BCE and 3rd century CE. Megaliths and then the Iron Age settlements existed during the period. So from archaeology, we get details about the burial practices, and also remains from the port towns. There were contacts with the Eastern Mediterranean regions and the Persian Gulf regions and so on. So transmarine exchange relations existed. Archaeology has attested that. Archaeology, starting from the Iron Age burial relics, the grave goods constitute the main archaeological material. And we have some writings, the cave labels in Brahmi, the earliest writings in the Tamil region. They are mainly in the rock caves of the Jain, Buddhist, and Ajivika monks. And these inscriptions are labels, not mentioning the name of the persons, but the functional name or occupation of the donors. They are appearing in the caves as donors, donors of some arrangement for the monks. For example, cutting a smooth surface as bed for the monks to sleep. And some arrangements for the monks. And then there an inscription, a label is there. They are referred to as the trader in corns, or dealer in clothes, or the dealer in toddy, or the dealer in salt, or dealer in gold. And also there is a reference to a nigamam, or an organization of the merchants. These traders are called in their occupation names, as I mentioned, and they are Pon Kolavan or dealer in gold, Uppu Vanigan or salt dealer, or Pon Vanigan, again dealer in gold. Then Vellarai Nigamam, a trading organization at Vellarai. Panitha Vanigan, a dealer in toddy, Aruge Vanigan, or a dealer in textiles, Ennai Vanigan, or dealer in oil, Kodu Vanigan, or dealer in plowshare or iron. These are examples. Except two, we don't find any name. And then these two are rulers. One is Pandya Neduncherian, a Pandya ruler, and Adan Chellirumpurai, son of Perunkadungo, and then a Cheran Ilam Kadungo. That is, the genealogy is mentioned in the very name, but these two are rulers. Neduncherian, a Pandya ruler, and Adan Chellirumpurei's son, Perunkadungo's son, Cheran Ilam Kadungo. Apart from this, we don't find any personal name mentioned in his inscriptions. Again, Brahmi inscriptions have come up from potsherds collected from the various various port towns of the time. Arikamedu, Aragan Kulam, and Pattanam in Kerala. Various ports of the time were excavated, and there we have potsherds with Brahmi labels. Yes, there existed writing at this particular period. It's between 2nd century BC and 1st century, 2nd century CE, Common Era. These writings appeared. The historians started calling the period as early historic. We have Greco-Roman writings during the period, writings by Pliny, Ptolemy, and then the unknown authors' work, Periplus, Maris, Erythrae. These navigators' records give us information about the traders coming and then taking spices from prices and spices, various forest products, silk, and various other artifacts like gems and semi-precious stones and so on. And from the interior, some archaeological sites like Nattamedu and Tandikudi, Kodumanal, various sites have been excavated, and these sites showed manufacturing of beads, carnelian, and various other semi-precious stones. So gems and semi-precious stones, generally lapidary products were there. And some of these sites really indicated the presence of the merchants from long distance. These merchants came from the north. These were long distance merchants, and the excavation showed rouleted ware shirts showing Brahmi labels on them. They all mentioned just the name of, obviously, the possessor of the port. Rouleted ware was a quality ware and was part of the personal possession. When the traders traveled, they carried the port, and as mark of the personal identity, they put their name on the rouleted ware. In various port towns, excavation showed the presence of Eastern Mediterranean potsherds and sometimes even pre-Roman um, pot, uh, pre-Roman pottery. So there is some kind of a mismatch between what you find in the poems by way of material culture. So people used to wonder what could be the actual situation. Initially, the historians and archaeologists and epigraphists, depending upon their source material, came to the conclusion differently. For example, historians who specialized the Greco-Roman writings talked about the maritime civilization of the period, maritime civilization which witnessed Indo-Roman trade. Similarly, the epigraphists who studied the cave labels, they talked about the heterodox religious expansion. Then scholars who studied the Sangam poems, they talked about the Sangam culture, the Sangam period. And all these looked altogether different because archaeologists on the one side studying the burial relics talked about a megalithic culture. And then those archaeologists who excavated the port towns, they talked about the maritime culture. And as I said, in the case of the Tamil literature, a different kind of understanding, Tamil civilization. Now, I, as a student specializing the period, found that we should have a perspective of convergence. It is true that the megaliths would go to 500 BCE, but they come down to 2nd century CE. And you have the so-called early historic period starting from 2nd century BCE and coming down to 3rd century CE. Tamil heroic poems start from 3rd century BCE or 2nd century BCE and come down to 3rd century CE. So there is overlap, very clear overlap of culture. In addition to that, we have references to the Roman traders coming to the seaboards of Tamilagam, the west coast as well as the east coast. And they also talk about the burials. They talk about the hero stones. And scholars like Professor Champak Lakshmi have studied this. The references to Iron Age megalithic relics and practices in Tamil poems. So convergence is very clear. Instead of seeing different cultures associated with the source material, we should be using source material clues to understand contemporary life and people. Then the picture that is uh, available to you if you make use of the concept of social formation. You have unevenly evolved means of subsistence in different landscape ecosystems, but they were interacting. They were interacting against one another. They were exchanging goods, also exchanging ideas. So it was possible for these people to speak a common language, Tamil, not the present day Tamil, but old Tamil. And old Tamil is the only Dravidian language available to us. It's even right to say that is Dravidian. And the term Tamil actually comes from Demila. And Dravidian is the Sanskrit form of that. Dravidian is not a Tamil word. Dravida is not a Tamil word, it is a Sanskrit word. Dravida in Tamil is Demila, and Demila becomes Tamil. The language was common to the entire Tamilagam, which included even Kerala. So you have Dravidian speaking people, and at the technology level, they were iron smelting people. So iron smelting, Dravidian speaking people settled in different ecosystems, different landscape ecosystems, and depending upon the natural resources available, with the technology of iron, they interacted and developed means of subsistence differently. Hunters and gatherers used iron tips as their arrow. They used iron tips in their arrow. But in the Sweden cultivation landscape ecosystem, they used the iron-tipped digging stick, irumbu taleyatta vilukol, iron-tipped digging stick, and in certain areas with enough water, in the red soil track, but water used to be available. Mainly in the elevated places and dales, they could use plow. There are various terms referring to plow. Nanjil, Mary, Kuru, and so on. So they used the iron plowshare. And then in the Palay zone where hunters, where plunderers existed, the Marava group, and they used sword and dagger and various other iron-made implements. And you collect all these from the megalithic graves. As part of megalithic grave goods, there are various items belonging mainly to the weapons. Agricultural tools are also there. When you compare more than agricultural tools, tools used for combats are seen. So why talk about megalithic culture differently, or the Indo-Roman trade and maritime civilization differently, and Tamil heroic culture differently? They all belonged to the same culture, same social formation, agro-pastoral social formation, but it had its points of exchange, sometimes a small place of exchange called Nalangadi or Andikadai, or sometimes as the port town, where traders from all over reached. And overseas merchants also came. So that kind of a place certainly differed. Various cultures converged, various artifacts reached there, and then we have relics of that kind. But one has to remember that the overall society was not a society depending upon exchange based on exchange value. It was not a monetized society. It was a non-monetized goods for goods exchange society with no notion of profit nor interest. For example, they had the practice called Kuritumar Edirpai or Kuri Edirpai, a kind of loan practice, loan without interest. If one jackfruit was borrowed from a kudi, a family, by another family, then even after 3 years or 4 years, the jackfruit can be returned, not with any addition. So if one jackfruit is taken as loan, one jackfruit is returned even after 2 years, 4 years. That means they never had any notion of interest. Similarly, they had gift exchange, they had reciprocity, they practiced Kodai. It was a redistributive society. The chieftain pooled the resources and then redistributed among the kinsmen and also bards and various other dependents. So it was a kind of clannish society, and there existed only chieftains. It was not a class structured society. Caste system was not there. It was a pre-caste society and pre-class society, but certainly differences were there, and therefore anthropologically the society could be identified as a ranked society, ranked chieftains, and it was pre-state. As you know, theoretically a state comes into being only in a class structured society when there is class division, class-based stratification, then there would be state formation. The formation of the state is not possible in a clannish kind of environment. The Cheras, Cholas and Pandyas were the highest chieftains, and they had all sorts of features closer to that of kingdoms, but they hadn't become ruling kingdoms of the time. They were only chieftains. So these features are taken together. Now we find in the Tamil heroic poems, Tamil heroic chieftains with their various levels of material culture in different zones. That is the case even today. You don't have the same kind of material culture everywhere. We have in the interior, in the forest, still hunting, gathering people. Thank you very much. I hope I haven't, I have overused the time. Sorry, I can spend as much time you want for making clarifications. I'm sorry to have used up the entire time. Okay.
No, thank you so much, sir, for presenting this lecture, for doing this lecture. It was truly an enlightening lecture for all of us. We got to know a lot of things about the Sangam literature, about the religion, as you said, and about the state. I think there are some questions, about three or four of them. One is from Anurup Tantri, and I think you have answered it partially.
Yeah.
That was, what was the nature of state during the Sangam period, and
Yes.
do the poem throw some light on this issue?
Yes. There was no state in its full-fledged form during the period, because a state has to be decided. I mean, a state has to be defined uh, as the political authority transcending clan kin ties. You don't find that kind of ruling authority existing during the period. Uh, there was no standing army, there was no defined territory, and you don't find a family based lineage that can be identified as a dynasty. Although during the subsequent period you find dynasties with the same name. There existed Chera dynasty from 9th century onwards. There existed Pandya dynasty from 6th century AD onwards, and there existed Chola dynasty from 8th century AD onwards. But during the period of Tamil heroic poems, we cannot consider them as kings, although traditional uh, historiography would consider them as kings. Yeah.
The next question is from Ashwin Vijayan, and his question is, sir, how do this heroic poem help us in the study of ancient history of Kerala?
Yes, Kerala has the distinction of having the Chera chieftains uh, with the whole text called Patitrupattu dedicated to them. The uh, Kerala was ruled by the Cheras in the central part of Kerala mainly, and at the northern end, a chieftain of the Edimalai, uh, main chieftain well known in the poems is Nannan, but Erimala chieftains were ruling over. Uh, they belonged to the hill chieftains. And then in the southern part, the I chieftains, the pastoral chieftain. Uh, these chieftains were also very important, closer to the uh, what is called the Vendar kind. But they were all chieftains. And from the poems referring to the I chieftains and poems referring to the Erimala chieftains, and also the special text called Paditrupattu dedicated to the rulers of the Chera lineage, we get a lot of information about contemporary Kerala.
The next question is from Gayanand, and his question is, what was the cultural influence of Sangam at that time on neighboring areas like the present day Telugu speaking areas? Are there any cultural influences in the neighboring areas?
Yeah. Um, it's an interesting question. We don't have any direct influence of the Tamil heroic poems, but they might have there might have existed the same kind of culture, and also that there might have existed songs and so on, part of oral tradition. Uh, Overall culture uh, further south of the Malaprabha River till Kanyakumari was of the same kind, agro-pastoral, heroic kind of society. So whatever we talk about the Tamil heroic culture or Tamil heroic social formation or agro-pastoral social formation would apply to the other regions as well. Even Satavahanas, uh, before uh, Gautami Putra Shatakarni, were only chieftains. Shatavahanas were chieftains, not dynasty-based rulers or dynasty-based kings. Yeah.
Yeah, so sir, final question for the evening is, can you list some resources, books to refer to for Sangam age and poetry?
Hi, yes, George L. Hart has written uh, two books. One is on, one is his translation of Purananur, and the other is on uh, the culture of the the Tamil heroic period, and another is Kamil Solebil's The Smile of Murugan. Uh, Kamil Kamil Swelebil Swelebil. Then my humble work is there, social formations of early South India, and that was published by Oxford University Press in 2010. And I have another work, Rethinking Classical Indo-Roman Trade, that also deals with the socio-economic aspect of, mainly the economic aspect of the period. Rethinking Classical Indo-Roman Trade, published by Oxford University Press in 2015. And there is one work by um, uh, Shivatampi. He talks at length the social and economic aspects of the Tamil region. Then in archaeology, there are several works. Professor Subbarayalu's work is there, published by, it's mainly based on epigraphical studies, main contributions by him, but it gives you a very good understanding of the uh, early historic as well as early medieval South India. And then Dr. K. Rajan, archaeologist, Professor Rajan has published several works, and it gives you a detailed understanding of the early historic and then early Iron Age of South India. And he has related the archaeological relics with references in Tamil heroic poems.
So thank you very much, sir, for taking out time from your busy schedule to deliver this Carvan lecture. And it was truly an honor for us to host you this evening. And thank you
Okay,
very much,
quite
everybody who
well.
took out time.
Yeah. Now, I hope I was clear. There was no connectivity problem or any other. I hope the listeners were able to follow what I said. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Definitely, sir.
Okay.
Thank you very much, everybody who joined us live this evening. And it was truly a great evening. And we wish you all a great year ahead. We have another session coming up on 4th of July by Professor T.K. Subramaniam. And
Okay.
he was a retired professor. He's going to talk about the trends in the Vijayanagar historical studies. So
Okay.
do join us. Thank you so much and have a great evening.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye, sir.
Shall I take leave?